So I'm going to start talking about our topic tonight, which is something that is pretty universal and will work on many different levels. The way that I'm going to talk about it is mostly geared towards our question of the week and the challenge of the week in the dojo, but I'm also going to get a little bit more general with it. So the topic is stories, and we called this talk The Power of Stories. And I'm going to talk about stories in a good way, and I'm going to talk about stories in a bad way. So let's get just the general sense of what I mean by stories. I mean that we are obsessed with storytelling as human beings. And this is something to really come to terms with, at least at first, rather than running away from it. And we all love stories. We love movies, we love reading books, we love hearing people tell stories, and we love somebody who's really great at telling stories. There are things that go into being a great storyteller that we want to try to emulate. But I want to talk about the reason that we love stories and how we are really always kind of functioning in storyland, at least until we get out of it and we are enlightened and have moved on to the next phase of our experience as a soul or Buddha nature or wherever we go after this. So we love stories, and we love how they have kind of a familiar cadence to them. There's a rhythm, right? There's a beginning, middle, and end, and we like sometimes guessing what's going to happen. We love sometimes knowing what's going to happen. If you're like me, you like watching some of the same movies over and over again, and there is something that is that is very comforting when you're watching something that you've already watched or you're rereading a book. I read this series of books. Have any of you guys ever read Robert Jordan? Robert Jordan was a fantasy novelist in the same vein as like George R.R. Martin, but his books were very long. And I started reading these books when I was in 4th grade. These books are like 1,000 pages long. That's not an exaggeration. They're ridiculously long. And I read them 2 or 3 times all the way through. I must have had just nothing better to do with my life. But they're great books for the most part. I don't know if you're going to read them multiple times. But we love kind of getting sucked into a story. We love how it takes us out of our normal kind of everyday existence. We love really being sucked into like a great movie. If a movie is done really well and the acting is spectacular, the best part about it is that it takes us into a new world. Even if it is taking place in the same kind of general world that we live in, it's not our world, it's somebody else's world. And we, in our own lives, in our own consciousness, have a tendency to tell stories. We tell ourselves stories about what's happening in our lives. We tell ourselves stories about what has happened. We tell ourselves stories about what's going to happen. And it just really works for us in the human form to relate to things in story form. And we should get really good at telling ourselves stories, and this is what the challenge of the week is about, is to write the story of your life in an empowering way, which is a challenge and something that I'm suggesting that we do because it's not actually what we normally do, at least for many people. We normally tell ourselves the story of our life in a disempowering way. And we look at things in terms of what is happening to us and how we're kind of pushed about by life. And oftentimes our experience of life is that it matches the story that we're telling ourselves about our life. And if you wake up and it's raining out, you look out the window and you go, man, this sucks. It's raining. Somebody must hate me up there. Right? Why is this happening to me? You go outside and you try to start your car and it doesn't start. Ow! Why is this happening to me? The universe is conspiring against me. And you finally get the car started and you're sitting in traffic. Again, why do I live in a city where there's traffic even in quarantine? How is this even possible? And the day continues going from there. And you look back on your day, or even in the moment, you're telling yourself the story of, well, first this happened to me, and then this happened to me, and then on top of all of that, this terrible thing happened to me. And you get the feeling of that story, and you get the mindset that it puts you in. It puts you in this victim mentality. It puts you in this kind of energy-sapping state where you feel like you're just getting pounded into the ground by life. And this is, if you haven't already guessed yet, not super helpful. This is not actually the way that we want to interact with our life and interact with the stories that we're telling about our life. So while we are in this state before enlightenment, when we are interacting with our lives and in the world, with the world through stories, we may as well learn how to tell great empowering stories. So you could have the same exact day. You wake up and you look out the window and you see that it's raining, and you can, part of this could be kind of similar to positive thinking. You could look outside and you can see it's raining and say, well, I guess we don't have to worry about fires for the next couple of weeks at least. Or you could look out and see, all right, it's raining. Well, I personally don't love the rain, but I know other people do. And this is going to be a great opportunity for me to be in the world and get over my fear of getting wet. And then you could get into your car and it could not start, and you could say, you could think of it as just more evidence of how life sucks, or you can look at it and say, well, maybe this means that I need to get a new car, and that's kind of exciting. Let me think about that. That's kind of exciting. If you don't have money for it, okay, it's time for me to get a new bike, whatever. You get into traffic, and if you have the context of traffic bad, traffic is more evidence that the universe is conspiring against me, then of course you're going to have a terrible experience being in traffic. But if the story that you're telling yourself is, this traffic is an opportunity for me to sit and be with myself. This traffic is an opportunity for me to work on my posture, work on my breathing. This traffic is an opportunity for me to listen to an extra episode of that podcast, or to listen to, or just go ham on this karaoke that I'm doing with myself. Whatever the opportunity that is presented to you. Again, you hear me talk about this all the time, is seeing the challenges that life throws at us as opportunities rather than as just bad things, right? The challenge is an opportunity to grow at the very least, if not to be creative and find a new way around it, right? So let me actually pull up my notes. I actually have notes for this talk, so that's how you know it's going to be a good one. This is something that I've been working on pretty regularly over the last couple of years. But we want to recognize the things that make a story disempowering and the things that make a story empowering. And part of it is, of course, being able to see things in a positive light versus only in a negative light. Part of it is seeing the trajectory that it takes us on. So if you imagine your story is taking you down this way, then this is the way that you're going to continue going. But if you can see if you can frame your story in a way that's taking you this direction, towards growth, towards some kind of a higher place, then that is going to energize you and actually keep sending you in that direction. If you are... Take this story, actually, so you guys have heard me read stories from Zen Flesh, Zen Bones many times. This is one of my favorite books. And I think that this book is a great example of stories that have an empowering context because of the nature of this book. This book is all about people who are on the spiritual journey and who are taking the punches that life throws at them and growing and becoming better because of it. And I thought, let's just test this. I just flipped to a random story. So the one that I flipped to earlier today was called A Drop of Water. Let me try to find it again here. I wrote down the number. Here we go. So A Drop of Water goes like this. A Zen master named Gisan asked a young student to bring him a pail of water to cool his bath. The student brought the water and, after cooling the bath, threw onto the ground the little that was left over. "You dunce," the master scolded him. "Why didn't you give the rest of the water to the plants? What right have you to waste even a drop of water in this temple?" The young student attained Zen in that instant. He changed his name to Tekisui, which means a drop of water. And I could flip to probably any other random page in this book and come up with some kind of a similar story. So if you are not a monk, you're not trying to kind of get somewhere on the spiritual path, and you're just kind of like a normal person looking at this from the outside, you might see this and say, well, this kid was just trying to do what he was told, and then he got yelled at for it, and that's so tough, and like how can anybody be expected to go on like that? It must be so hard to be a monk, and how does anybody ever do it? And it's probably why most people aren't monks, and it's probably why most people don't really get very far in the spiritual path, because the first roadblocks that we get to, whether it's a teacher yelling at us, or it's, the first time I sit in meditation and it's so hard, give up. Because you see that as evidence that I'm not gonna do this. I'm not cut out for it. Or you take that somebody yelling at you and you think like, well, this person's just mean. I don't need this in my life. And I was talking about Sifu Brown earlier today, and I was saying that Sifu Brown is a very demanding teacher, and he's a infinitely more demanding employer. So when I worked for Sifu Brown, well, this is how he described it. He described it like everybody wants a Sifu for martial arts, but nobody wants a Sifu like just in your life, in your job, telling you what to do. And it is, when you're in class and he's yelling at you, you're like, yeah, I love it. I need that tough love. But then when you're screwing things up as staff at the school and he's yelling at you, you're like, this is terrible. I don't like this at all. And that was my experience in the beginning. And then I kind of got over it really quickly, and I realized, well, he's doing this for the benefit of the dojo and for the benefit of the other students that are relying on me doing my job great, but also he's doing it for me. Every time he yells at me, I see that this is his care and his desire for me to become great. And this is after I told him that I wanted to teach martial arts someday. So every time I was getting that kind of energy from him, I saw it as an opportunity to say, yes, sir, I'll do my best, I'll be better next time. But I took it on as this understanding. I understood it as somebody showing deep care for me and a desire for me to become better. And this fit into the story that I had of myself as heading in that way. I'm going to teach martial arts someday. I'm going to do this thing that I love. I'm going to be able to be a Sifu and to be like this. And if this is what it takes to get there, then great. Pile it on. Thank you, sir, may I have another? Like, the worse it is, the better it is for me, right? And this is something that we want to take into everyday life. So if you look at not only the people in our lives that you choose to have in your life, but also the things that happen to us, and recognize that those are the best teachers, and those are the best opportunities to grow and become stronger. And that's the kind of story that you're fitting them into, that's the mindset that you have, then you're not going to get bogged down by those things. They're not going to feel like roadblocks. They're going to seem like ramps that shoot you up into the direction that you want to go in. When we consider the question of the week is, how should we live life? And this could include, but it's distinct from, what should we do? So, of course, we should consider what we're doing in life. We should consider the actions that we're taking and the things that we're saying and the relationships that we form and all that stuff. But the question of how should we live could also mean that you're actually doing the same things that you have already been doing in your life, but you're doing them differently and you're doing them with a different mindset. So I shared this saying from Bruce Lee, and he may have stolen it from somebody else, but this is probably the most famous version of this. Bruce Lee said, before martial arts, a punch was just a punch. During learning martial arts, while I was learning, a punch was much more than a punch. And after mastery, a punch was just a punch. And this really speaks to this idea of the how or the why in the way that we do life. So, before martial arts, you look at a punch and you just see it as it's a punch. This is something that, I've seen in a movie and maybe it looks kind of cool, but at the end of the day, it's just a punch. Like, what does this mean beyond just some violence or something that looks kind of cool? When you start learning martial arts, especially with the depth of philosophy that like a real martial arts practice will have, a punch is so much more than a punch. A punch is a vehicle to enlightenment. A punch is an invitation to be so in the moment, so presently focused, that it transforms your consciousness and your awareness and your very being. And this is your punch, and this is somebody else punching at you, right? In any time that this punch is happening, it is this invitation to see the moment and see your life in a totally different way. And then after we become masters or get to some level of mastery, a punch is just a punch again. And it's not because the punch loses its power. It's because when we master one thing, we master all things. And in fact, all of our lives get raised up to this level that the punch had. That punch was so exciting and interesting, and that punch was that opportunity to see the world in a different way. Well, now anything that I do can take on that same kind of level of mindfulness. I can take on that level of mindfulness. I can rise to the occasion and walk down the street with the same kind of attitude and mindfulness that I had throwing punches in class. This is the story of our practice of martial arts. When you are telling the story of your life, you do not need to change the things that you're doing. You can, but if you're doing the challenge of the week, I don't want you to go back, like we don't want revisionist history where we're actually leaving stuff out or putting stuff in that didn't happen, but we can frame it in a way that is very different. And we can see the why and the how of everything that we're doing now as being something that is super empowering. This is a holy spiritual experience, this journey that we're on. Each thing that happens is just another step along the way in this journey. And when you are deciding what you're going to do in the future, you don't have to be like when you're writing your story, I graduated college, I took some martial arts classes, and then I became the first astronaut to walk on Mars. Maybe that's what you want to do, and if that is really what you want, then do that and put it in your story. That's a kind of another part of the story, but the part that I'm focusing on tonight at least is you can lead what might seem to an outside viewer and what might seem to you to be a very boring, very normal life. But a life worth living is one where we are excited and one where we are experiencing every moment and everything like it is the greatest novel that has ever been written. Like it's the best movie that you've ever seen in your entire life. You're so sucked into every moment that you can't imagine something better. And it doesn't mean that you're changing what you're doing. You might, but you've heard the phrase, chop wood, carry water before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water after enlightenment. The things that you do don't need to change for your experience to be fundamentally different and to be to have such a powerful experience of life and such a positive and to really just be able to love your life exactly the way that it is. This is what our practice is about on some level. What is martial arts? If you look at it on the outside and you don't really know what it is, you can just say, well, they're moving and they're breathing. And this is Tai Chi and this is martial arts. What's meditation? Meditation is sitting and breathing. And if you are just walking down the street and you're just letting your mind be in the normal place that it always is, I'm just daydreaming, or what you're actually doing is telling yourself stories of, well, this is what happened earlier today, and this is what's going to happen later on, and all that, fantasy world that you're living in. That's one way of walking down the street. But you could also walk down the street like we practice martial arts. And I don't mean that you're like throwing front kicks and punches as you go down the street. You can do that if you want to. And I personally do that pretty often. But what I mean is you take the same kind of care and put the same kind of attention to detail and walk and move with the same intentionality that we do when we are practicing in class, in the dojo, at the park, at home. And that totally changes your experience of that moment. In that moment, you are all powerful because you're choosing to walk the way that you're walking. You are choosing to experience that moment to its fullest. And this is what there is for us to get out of our practice, is to take that invitation out into everyday life and to do that as often as possible. This is enlightenment. Enlightenment is being in the moment and choosing how you want to be, and not just being sucked into that fantasy world of the story that you're telling. So this is now kind of getting into the idea of the issue with constantly telling ourselves stories. The story is a fantasy, and if you're walking down the street but telling yourself a story, you're not walking down the street. You're not living in the moment. You're not living life. You're living some kind of a fantasy. So while we want to recognize that the story can be empowering and the story can help energize us and take us in the direction that we want to go, We don't want to get attached to the story, because while you're living in the story, this is not actually a complete connection to the highest self. This is not a full experience of enlightenment of the moment, because you're still up in your head running this story. So what we want to be able to do is transcend the story and let it go. When we meditate, this is what we're trying to do. We will most likely recognize the thoughts that we have in our mind, and very often they are taking the form of a story. And we want to be able to let that go, because it's an attachment to something else that's happened, or it's an attachment to a fantasy of what we think is going to happen, good or bad. Still fantasy. Still attachment. So when we let that go and we allow ourselves to be fully in the moment, a place beyond story, a place beyond logic and time, right? The story is some kind of a chronological order of this happened, this happened, this happened. That's time. This is the way that we experience time, right? In meditation, time can seem to go on forever. One breath can feel like an entire lifetime. And this is what there is for us when we get beyond the story, when we learn to be able to let it go. So until we are enlightened, we want to use the power of story and tell empowering stories and have them send us on that empowering trajectory. When you write the story of your life, make it empowering. I asked you guys, nobody did this, but I asked you to ask me about how I control the weather. Because this is, you guys might not know this about me, but I am all-powerful and I control the weather. And this is how I do it. I told myself the story when I was living in Michigan that I don't like cold weather. I'm going to control the weather and make it warm, because I'm from California and I can't deal with snow and I can't deal with anything under 60 degrees. So I controlled the weather by moving to California and moved to LA. And this was, as far as I can remember, always a part of my dream of life, is I'm going to live somewhere warm so that I can be happy. Of course, we want to be able to get past that and be totally happy and fulfilled even when it's snowy. I don't know why anybody would live someplace but it snows, but okay, that's your choice. But choose it and have an empowering context with it, right? Now that's all story, right? Beyond that, there is no cold or warm, there's no weather at all. There's only the weather inside our mind. And this is like one of the other stories that I flipped to with Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. Two monks were walking, and one of them was, they were looking at a flag flapping in the breeze, and one of them says, "Look, the flag is moving." And the second one says, "No, the wind is moving." But then the sixth patriarch, who overheard them, said, "The flag's not moving, and the flag's not moving, and the wind is not moving. Your mind is moving." And this is the reality of the story. The story is our mind moving, and we have the power to still it. And meditation is that opportunity to still the story, to be in the moment, to be in the present. And then from there, either just be in it as long as we can, or when we leave it, decide where we're going next. We're deciding where that story is taking us. And recognize that everything that happens is on some level our mind moving. It is not the weather, it's not the traffic, it's not my job that I hate, it's not my job that I love, it's your mind. And when we have full power over the stories that we tell and the ability to move beyond the story, that's when we've really got something. That's when we've arrived. That's when we are connecting to the highest self. So let's practice that tonight in meditation. Sit comfortably.